Learning how to create and control light in post-production is one of the most important skills that you can have if you want to make really dramatic photographs. If you want to learn how to do that, stick around, because today we're going to use Photoshop to turn this into this. So this little area here kind of reminded me of something right out of an Edgar Allan Poe book. I just got this kind of claustrophobic, kind of creepy feeling, and I think maybe it was the candelabras and all of these art panels that are hanging all over the place with this kind of classical, almost Michelangelo type artwork. And you know, something like right out of the Fall of the House of Usher or something. That's really what I was envisioning when I shot this. So, you know, the shot is a little off kilter, and everything is angled towards this area of daylight out here, which I kind of imagined as being, you know, the safe place. You just have to get through that cage to safety. So we're going to recreate that today. I'm going to show you how to do that. And the idea here is that, you know, you have an idea when you shoot, and then you carry that idea all the way through the processing of your photo and hopefully end up with something that's pretty close to where you started in your mind. And then you're not just taking a snapshot, you're not trying to compose a photo in the traditional way. You're actually making a piece of artwork that reflects a state of mind or an imaginal place that you were in. So let's just dive right into this here. So as you probably guessed, we're eventually going to go to black and white with this, but first I want to play with the light and darken this up a bit. So I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer to this, and what I want to do is darken this. Now if I darken it like this, you know, I'm leaving my highlights alone, and I'm just pulling my midtones down, and everything's getting kind of dark on the lower end in the shadows, and that's not really what I want. So to darken this, what I'm going to do is maintain the tonal relationships between the shadows and the highlights, which are up here, the default position being on this 45-degree angle. So if I just grab my highlight point and drag this down, I'm not going to drag it too far, just kind of like that, and then I can darken this up. So I'm going to click on my black point. I don't want all of these blacks to go all the way into the shadows. So by clicking on it, I activate it, and all I have to do is hit my up arrow key on my keyboard a couple of times, and you can see that those blacks start to open up. Now I don't want to go too far, so maybe 4 is about it. And if I want to pull those highlights up a little bit, I can, and just tweak this curve until I kind of get what I want. And you know, that's looking pretty good right there, I think. Alright, so let's play with this light now. There's several sources of light here. We've got the candelabras, which I'm considering kind of a sinister light source, right? They're warmer, and I don't know, you get this strange kind of, you know, Poe-ish feeling from this room and these candles. Now this is another thing entirely. This is the outside world, which is, you know, kind of splashed up here, and we've got all this daylight. So we're going to play with this light a little bit and see if we can't get something that reflects the mood that I'm trying to convey here. So I think what I'll do is make a stamp, Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E on a Mac, and I'm going to blur this. So let's go up into the filter menu and choose Gaussian blur. And now obviously we don't want to blur it that much. I'm thinking probably about maybe 35 pixels is about right. And I'm going to press OK and let that blur. Now we've got some, you know, relatively tame highlights here, so I really want to amp those up, and I kind of want to let this blow out, really. So I'm going to change the blend mode here to Linear Dodge Add. Now Linear Dodge Add is one of the Photoshop Special 8 blend modes, and it's really controlled by the fill slider, not the opacity slider. And I'm probably going to end up duplicating this layer, but because it's not really bright enough. But let's just go with this for a moment, and let's put a black mask on here. So Alt and click on the black mask icon, and now I can just take my mouse and a brush and start to control the size of my brush here and just paint this stuff back in. So let's just And you see how we get that nice kind of glowy effect, right? And so we're going to reduce the opacity here and make this brush a little bigger. And I'm going to go down to 20 and just start to bring some of this stuff back in up here. Now, right here, this is kind of like, I don't know, the evil spirit kind of thing right here. This is the spirit that's controlling the whole room. And so this is going to end up being a focal point of our composition. So I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I'm going to bring that area back just like that. And we'll make sure that this is 100. Now, what I want to do is mask out this sill here. I don't want my light bleeding over down into the lower part of the room, because light, of course, wouldn't do that. So I'm just going to zoom in here and make my brush black and paint it about 50. And I'm going to just tame this a little bit, just like this, to make sure that we're not bleeding over too much. And I'm going to want to do the same thing here on this, and we'll just go all the way up. I don't think we went any further than that. And this is okay because the light is heading into the room slightly on an angle from the left, so I'm going to leave that the way it is. Alright, so now I want to add another glow to this. And so what I'm going to do is just simply duplicate this layer. I've already got my blur here. And when I duplicate it, Controller Command J, it's going to, duplicate the mask too and the blend mode, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to take my mask and drag it down to the trash and delete. And I'm just going to create another one, a white one. And I'm going to change the blend mode of this now to screen, which is a much tamer kind of blend mode for lighting things up. And the first thing I think I'm going to do here is see if I can't govern this with blend if. So double click here, and blend if allows me to blend two layers that are on top of each other according to the tone. And so what I want to do is take this underlying layer, which is this layer right here, and bring the shadows back. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and split this slider. There we go. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And you see what happens? It blocks out those shadows. And so I can really keep my shadows in the shadow and just light up the highlights. So we just want to check and see that we're getting our candelabras, and we are, and everything is starting to come together really nicely. So this is being kind of blown out, right? But I do think that I want to make this a little more bright, a little more blown out. So I'm actually going to duplicate this original layer. So let's just rename this, and we're going to call this LD Add Glow, for Linear Dodge Add Glow. And then we're going to call this Screen Glow, because that's what it is. Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, just like this. And I'm going to get rid of the mask that's on here and put a black mask back on here. Hold down the Alt or the Option key and hit the mask icon. And now I'm just going to paint this light in. And for this, I'm actually going to use my Wacom tablet, and I'm going to just paint this in. I want to make sure that I have an opacity brush selected, and I do. And I'm going to make this a little bigger. And we're going to paint in at about 20%. I just want to paint in this area. So I'm going to want to be painting with white to paint this effect in. And I just want to bring in some of this glow in this area. Just a little, bring up some there too, and maybe a little into here, but just kind of like that. So now for this one, we're getting a little washed out here. And so what I'm going to do is invoke a blend if for this as well, and just bring back some of those shadows. So hold down my Alt or my Option key, and right, that looks really perfect. So you see what's happening? The shadows are coming back, but my highlights are still being left alone here. So I'm going to hit OK, and then we'll just turn that on and off. That's perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. All right, so at this point, I think we can go to black and white. Actually, let's do one more thing. Let's shut this down. This is a little distracting. I want my focus to be here and on these candelabras. I don't want this area here to be a focal point. So I'm going to put a curves layer on here and just pull this down the same way we did last time. And I'm just watching this area now. So just pull that down like that. And I'm going to correct my blacks a little bit by clicking. I don't want all those blacks to go completely black. Just 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's perfect. Maybe one more. Okay. And so now I'm going to turn this mask black by inverting it, Control or Command I. And I'm just going to paint with white in here now. So we can paint with a 50% brush. And I'm just going to start painting this away. Just where it needs to be painted away. So let's zoom in here a little bit so we can see what we're doing. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I'm half blind, right? So let's just shut this down. And we might even need to shut it down more, but you know, the point is we've got our mask made now. So, and if I want to see what the mask looks like on the layer, all I have to do is hit the backslash key, and there it is. So I can see now that, you know, I forgot some areas. And I want to paint with white because I'm going to be painting my mask away like this. Just get rid of those areas that I missed, and you know, I can go out to 100% now if I want, because I can see what I'm doing. So like that, and that looks great. So hit the backslash key again to go back, and so here's my before, here's my after, and let's look at the effect on the overall photo. Do we need to bring that down a little more? Yeah, maybe. Let's try it. So let's just try pulling down the midtone area. There we go. So that's looking a lot better, right? Now that is not a distraction at all. And you can see that my blacks aren't going all the way to black. So now we can go to black and white. So make a black and white adjustment layer. And so now we can play with our colors. And if I turn this off, you know, what do we have here? Yellows, reds, there's probably going to be some blue in this area. So we want to make sure that, that those are the colors that we're playing with. So let's turn that back on. And I think maybe we bring up the yellows a little bit, right? Because that's where most of the light is. And the red looks like it's mostly those reflections, so we probably want to bring that up. And blue, yeah, we want to bring that like that, because if I pull this down, you see how this starts to flatten out? That's not what I want. But we might be able to, actually we can get a little more contrast in there with the cyan. All right, so that's looking good now. And we're really getting there. We're really getting to the place that I want to get to. So really what I want is I want a disorienting feeling from this photograph. So how am I going to get that? Well, what I can do is make a stamp, Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E if you're on a Mac, and we're going to add a blur vignette to this. So how are we going to do that? We're going to go up into the filter menu, and I'm going to select blur and radial blur. Now, unfortunately, we don't get a preview of the effect here, but you don't need very much of it. So what do I got here? I'm at 3. So if I just turn this up to 7 and we'll hit OK, and it's going to take a second for Photoshop to do this, but you'll see that you know, this is way out of control. It's way too much. And you wouldn't think a blur of 7, wow. You know, that's absolutely not what we want. So I'm going to undo that. And what I think the best way to handle this is to make this a smart object, because then it's easy to go back and change the amount of the blur until you get what you want. But in this case, I think that 3 setting is really what we want. So back to filter and blur and radial blur. And I'm just going to highlight that and type 3 and hit OK, because I think that's going to be a really good setting. So if you go ahead and you make this and you decide it's too much, and I know it looks like a lot now, but we're going to fix that. You just need to double click on the words radial blur down here, and your blur dialog will come up, and you don't have to go through all the trouble of going up into the menu and grabbing it. It's all right here. Then you also remember what setting you use. Now, these smart filter masks, I never use them, and they just take up room in my timeline, so I always trash them, because I'm going to put a mask up here anyway. And so let's do that. Let's put a regular white mask on here. And here's how we're going to fix this problem. I'm going to make my brush big. In this case, I'm going to make my brush as big as I can, which is 5,000 pixels. And I'm going to paint with about 60%, and I want to paint with black. So I'm going to hit the X key and paint with black. So if I tap here, what I'm doing is I'm eliminating the center of my photograph from the blur, which is exactly what I want, right? So there we go. There's one. And I'm just going to make 2 taps just like that. So you can already see that part of my stuff is coming back. Now I'm going to make my brush much smaller. And I'm still painting at 60%. I think I'll back that off to 50. And I'm just going to paint in these areas that are important that I don't want blurred at all. Right? So I don't want this blurred. I don't want this blurred. And, you know, some of this we want to keep that. So not too much, but there we go. All right, so if I hold down the Alt or the Option key and click on my mask, I can see what my mask looks like. And so, you know, I got a little blur up in here. But I don't want any here because this is important. And we're going to fix that in a minute, as you'll see. So that's looking really excellent. And right now the photo looks good, but always keeping an eye on my histogram, right? And I'm safe with my black tones. I don't have anything that's crushed. I do have some stuff that's blown out, but I did that on purpose, so I know that that is the way I want it. So let's darken this photo just a little more with a curves adjustment layer. Just pull this down like so. And just push those shadows a little more into the darkness. Actually, I don't even think we need to do that with the highlights. We can just pull this down a bit. That is looking nice. And now I really want to make sure that my blacks don't go too black with this adjustment. So that's really important. And you can see as I bring my blacks up, the overall contrast of the photo changes. And so now I can adjust this curve even a little more. And I'm getting what I want. Now, in this case, I want to bring back all the places where my highlights are. So I'm going to grab my black brush here, and I'm going to paint with 60% opacity. And I'm going to use my mouse and just start clicking with black because I don't want those highlights to go away. Right, so that looks good. And absolutely in here, and absolutely here. Now here, I might go, you know, 30%, let's do 20 and just start to bring in some of this stuff like this on the side so that doesn't go all black. And just a little there. I don't want that corner to go black. So this is starting to look pretty good. Now we have to decide what we want to do with our blur layer, our radial blur. So if I turn it off just by bringing the opacity down, you can see what happens. But as I bring this up, we get this interesting kind of, right, that's all the way. I don't think I want it all the way. Maybe somewhere around, I don't know, 60 or 70% is good. Just disorienting enough, but not really enough that it attracts anybody's attention. Let's go ahead and add a vignette to this. I'm going to use my lasso tool, and I'm going to start to make a nice organic shape. Now I know I want this in my photo, and we're going to bump the contrast up on this in a minute. So I want to kind of go around that and, right, just be, you know, make some bumps in your shape here, like so. And, you know, it doesn't really matter what the shape looks like because you can fix it. So I left an area in there. If I hit the Shift key, I get the little plus with the lasso sign, and I can just include that in my selection. So I've got the correct layer selected, which is the top, and now I'm going to make a curves adjustment. And if I, you know, bring this down, that's obviously backwards. That's not what I want. So I need to invert this mask. Control or Command I. And now we need a feather on the mask, and we're going to make the feather with a blur. And in this case, I'm going to want a nice big blur. So probably for my camera, about 400 pixels is going to be good. You can see what that does to the mask here. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I can bring this down. And I've got a nice vignette. I don't want to go all the way to black, so I'm going to govern my blacks again. So just about 3 or 4, which is really nice. And So now we can paint on this mask to bring back some of the areas that are kind of getting out of hand. Like this corner is a little too dark, right? So grab a brush and you're going to make your brush. I like to do this at low opacity and make a bunch of strokes. And so we'll leave the brush at 20%, and I'm going to want to paint with black. And for this, you want to, use as big a brush as you can. And I tend to start my strokes outside the area of the photograph because I don't want anybody to see where I planted that brush stroke, right? So just working the areas where I think things got a little out of hand. And just a little bit, right? We don't really need much. So I'll make my brush a little bit smaller here. And I'm just going to come in on this area here, like so. And a little up that way, and that's looking pretty darn solid at this point. Okay, so I think I'm almost there. I just need to really bring this out. And the way to do that is with a levels adjustment layer. So we know we're looking at this area. And if I start to make adjustments here, it gets distracting because everything else is getting bright and, I don't really know how the adjustments that I'm making relate to the rest of the image. So I'm going to just reset that. And what we really want to do here before we make our levels adjustment is make a mask of this. And the way to do that is with Quick Mask. So Quick Mask is this little icon down here. Just click on it. And nothing on the interface is going to change except the layer that you're working on is going to turn red. And when you're working in Quick Mask mode, you must paint with black. So I need to hit the X key. And you have to be painting with your brush at 100%. So I need to change my opacity to 100. And I can do that just by hitting the 0 key. Okay, so now what I want to do is make a mask of this area. So I'm going to make my brush about that size, and I'm going to click, and you see I get this nice red spot. So I'm just going to click a couple of times here to make sure I've got all of my area selected. It's feathered out really nice because my brush is feathered out nice. Now, I'm going to click on the Quick Mask icon and exit Quick Mask mode, and you'll see I've got a nice selection of my area. Okay, so all we need to do now is go ahead and make that levels adjustment layer, and now I can see what the heck I'm doing, right? So I really want this to be a prominent player here. Now, I don't want my contrast to get out of line. So that is looking darn good, I think. So I'm going to use my white brush, and I've got my vignette. I don't want this top part to be out of the picture as far as brightness goes because that looks a little unnatural. So now that I've got all these bright spots, I might go back and edit my vignette a little more just to kind of bring this area here into line with all the light that's happening up here. So I'm going to paint with black. And again, I'm going to paint at 20% and just kind of, bring some of this back a little bit so it doesn't look so vignette-y. Nothing worse than a vignette that looks like a vignette. And there you have it. So here's where we started, and this is where we ended up. And this is exactly what I had in mind when I shot this. So when you hear me talking about imaginal photography, this is the kind of thing that I mean, where you get onto a location and you kind of put yourself in that place and let that place speak to you, and you form an image in your mind, and then that's what you shoot and that's what you process. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and please jump over to my website and subscribe to the mailing list so that you can see all of the blog posts and the writing that goes along with this. This is Jim Wolnitzky from Altered Space Photo Tribe. I'll see you next time, and in the meantime, be creative and have fun.